a lot has already been said, but there's one element I'd like to add. So in 2014, I went to the United States to study for a PhD in nuclear engineering. And I was on a Fulbright fellowship, which was perhaps the most prestigious fellowship the United States can give, maybe the equivalent of the...
sorry, Mr. Chigarandi. Sorry, if you can raise your voice a bit for us. Sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's very good.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll say a bit about myself. In 2014, I went to the United States to study for a PhD in nuclear engineering on a Fulbright fellowship. And my research was at the University of Missouri. The University of Missouri has, according to records, the biggest research nuclear reactor located at a university. So it was kind of a privilege to be studying nuclear engineering at the biggest reactor. So some of the perspectives that I will bring to my presentation are based on that. So here is the thing. Let me see if I can share my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So my talk is going to be centered on a topic that I call the things that they do not teach you in university and the things that they are unlikely to teach you about nuclear safety in the university. One, let me begin with this question, or rather this statement. Ensuring nuclear safety does not come from science. I'm pretty confident that I'm speaking to a group of scientists or people from a scientific background. I too am from a scientific background. But the truth of the matter is that science and technology will not guarantee nuclear safety. They merely enhance it. Regulations are necessary, but they are not sufficient. Training is good, but it merely palliates the disease without curing it. What then is the missing link? As we ponder that question, I would like to ask you, what is special about today's date in nuclear safety? On the 28th of March in 1979, that's exactly 47 years ago today, the United States had its biggest nuclear safety crisis. 3 Mile Island problem. The reactor at 3 Mile Island is located in Pennsylvania. There was a partial reactor core melting. There was no explosion. The containment building was left intact. There was little radiation release. There was no immediate death reported, but there was huge media coverage. It was a crisis of technology. What happened is that one of the lids or the covers was open, but the signals and all the systems reflected that it was closed. So you had all these signals buzzing all over. And it misled the scientists into taking actions that actually led to the problem. However, it is important to note that there were no deaths, very little radiation released, yet it is regarded as the biggest crisis because of the publicity. A few months later, at a place called Church Rock in New Mexico, also in the United States, there was an actual spillage. More than 90 million gallons of radioactive liquid were spilled. More than 1,100 tons of solid radioactive waste material was released into the river called Pure. The consequences were devastating, particularly on the Navajo community. The Navajo community are predominantly the Native Americans. The devastation was on the environment, on animals, and on human life as well. There was very little media coverage. So that was not just a crisis that cost lives, but it was a crisis of justice. Every nuclear program, every nuclear safety program is a chain. It begins with assumptions, then there are protocols, then there are programs, then there are procedures, then there are physical buildings or assets put together. Then there is training and all those things that come into place that include safeguards, that include security, all those things. They are based on assumptions. So it is a chain. However, the strength of a chain depends on its weakest link. A nuclear safety program, even a security program or a safeguards program, is as good as its underlying assumptions. So let's go back to the comparison between what happened at 3 Mile Island and Church Rock. It leads us to what I call the miseducation of the nuclear scientist. So we ask questions. Did science and technology protect the Navajo nation? The technology was there, the science was there, but did they protect? Not really. Were science and technology, are they going to be protective of Africa as it seeks to integrate nuclear technologies into its energy answers? Probably not. So what is the missing link? Are we teaching nuclear safety as we should? This is what I would like to say to you. The things that you have been taught about science and technology, the things that you'll be taught about nuclear security, about safety and safeguards, they are facts. They are not false. However, they are inadequate. And that's where the problem lies. That will take me to Fukushima. Fukushima happened in 2011. And what they will not teach you in class and anyway is what I call the monumental mistake in mathematics. When you read about Fukushima, there were zero radiation deaths. 160,000 were evacuated. But the question is, how do we count the victims of nuclear incidents? The truth of the matter is that although no one died at the plant, the evacuation itself resulted in deaths. As people were moved from hospitals, for those that were in hospitals, as people were moved from the general area, the elderly, the sickly, the vulnerable, there were quite a number of deaths. You ask me, why does this matter? So here is the thing. Why do we have nuclear safety? Why do we have security and safeguards? The bottom line is that we want to save lives. However, when you look at the programs, considering what was at Fukushima, the focus was on the environment in and around the nuclear reactor itself. But safety is more than just what is in the reactor. It is more than the fissile material. It is more than the radioactive material. So although the tsunami did not result in radiation syndromes killing people, the incident at Fukushima actually resulted in fatalities. And those fatalities don't figure into the prosaic literature on radiation safety or nuclear safety, which is a big problem. Because it is like we do not count victims that are not gunshot wounds, forgetting that there is more to war than just gunshot wounds. So again, I will emphasize, what happened at Fukushima was an ecological, political, and ethical problem. That was just disguised as a technical problem. And this is the challenge that we've had with nuclear safety, safeguards, and security for 70 years. We don't pay enough attention to the ecological, the political, and the ethical problem. The technological issues, you will find them in books and in magazines. The science and technology, you will find it in modules. You will find it even in degrees and university programs. But they miss one thing. What they miss is, how do we count the real victims of poor nuclear safety? The third thing I'll talk about is what I call the algorithmic protection paradox. Why is it a paradox? Number one, those that think they are safe are the most vulnerable. Those that are afraid of it are the least vulnerable. Because of that, resources are disproportionately spent on the wrong prioritized population. Those that have the biggest current exposure are the least vulnerable. It is protection by abandonment, and it's a myth. Now, let me simplify that. If you're working in a nuclear reactor, you're going to be monitored for the radiation doses. There are going to be protocols that protect you. Guess what? you are much safer than somebody in the same community who is not monitored. Because should there be an incident, you already know at least where to begin from. They don't. Why is it like that? I think it is because our safety programs are meant to protect the quacking ducks more than the silent ducks. That was what happened between Pennsylvania and New Mexico. Pennsylvania is about 200 kilometers from Washington, D.C. That's where you get the border of Pennsylvania and Maryland. It is bordered by New York on the other side, and I think Ohio on the other side. Maryland, New York, and Ohio. It is in the mid-Atlantic. The population is predominantly Caucasian. New Mexico on the other side, it is predominantly a Native American territory. When you look at the boards, the people that come up with the regulations, most of them are from these affluent communities. If you look at the Nuclear Safety Board, it's rare to find a rural peasant on that board. But the urban elite share those boards, yet they live far away from the nuclear risk itself. So it is a paradox in that the people that don't really need the protection have the most protection. And the people that need the protection have the least protection. And often they do not know that they need it. Let me take that to an international level. The countries that do not have nuclear programs tend to believe that they are the safest. But guess what? They are the most vulnerable because they don't have the safety protocols and safety systems in place. And as we know, radiation does not know boundaries. It will surprise you that the countries that have nuclear programs, they are the most fearful about nuclear accidents. Consequently, they have put in place robust systems that kind of mitigates the safety risks, whereas the other countries that think they are safe do not have what it is that it takes to have a safety program. I'll come back to that later to explain why that is important. The next thing that they will not teach you in college is the inverse K law of nuclear safety. I know they will teach you about the inverse square law. The intensity of radiation is inversely proportional to the distance between the source and the target. But there is the inverse K law of nuclear safety. The communities most exposed to the nuclear risk are the least visible to the systems designed to protect them. The communities most exposed to the nuclear risk are the least visible to the systems. When systems are designed, they are designed for visible populations. They are designed for visible people. And the visible people are the quacking ducks. Let me begin with a naughty example. Has anyone heard about the International Atomic Energy Agency? I guess you've heard. Where are they based? Their headquarters is in Vienna, Austria. How many nuclear reactors does Vienna or does Austria have? 0. So all the citadel of regulatory authority is in Vienna. Vienna is in a country, Austria, that is no nuclear reactor. Trust me, Vienna has some of the most robust preparedness protocols. Why? That's the inverse care law. Communities most exposed to the nuclear risk are the least visible. When it comes to the location of the nuclear plants, there is what they call the not in my backyard argument. Very few urban communities, if any, would allow a nuclear plant to be built near them. Consequently, nuclear plants are located far away from urban areas, mostly in rural and remote areas, and in those areas, those communities are invisible to the regulations. So the question is not whether we have safety systems. We already do. The question is, for whom do they work? And who is left invisible? When a safety program is being put in place, the first question to ask is, for who is this safety program meant? Who is it supposed to protect? And who does it leave invisible? Because it is the invisible that suffer the most. Let me take you back to Fukushima. Who died in Fukushima? The patients in the hospitals. Why? Because all the safety programs and regulations were never meant for that invisible population. The weak and the sickly. Then the question arises, is such a safety program adequate? The scientists and the technologists would argue that we did all that nuclear science teaches us. But when you look at the issue broadly, you then realize that there was much more to it. So there is much more to nuclear safety than science and technology. Accidents are not surprises. So nuclear safety incidences, they are neither accidental nor incidental. When you look back, you always realize that it was predictable. But the underlying assumptions were not properly examined. At Chernobyl, the safety issues were not unknown. At Fukushima, the issue that a tsunami could cause a nuclear crisis was not unknown. But you know what the problem was at Fukushima? All the calculations were based on averages. And they came to the conclusion that 5.7 meters was the worst tsunami they could expect. But it turned out that on the day in question, the waves were 4 meters high when they had prepared for 5.7. So it was a mistake in assumptions. But why? It's because every program is based on assumptions. What assumptions are we making about climate change? What assumptions are we making about solar flares? what assumptions are we making about cybersecurity? That's a very interesting one. In most countries that have nuclear technology, both for military purposes and for civilian purposes, the nuclear codes are known by only a few people. In the US, it's the president who has access to the nuclear codes. And you ask me, why is the military relevant? The truth is, when it comes to nuclear safety, it doesn't matter whether it was detonated by the military or the civilian. The consequences will be the same. But what are the assumptions? The assumption is that Donald Trump is the only one, and a few other people, that is access to the nuclear codes. Is that really true? In this day and age, where most things are digitalized, where AI is predominant, where cybersecurity is an issue, only an unwise man would assume that the 3 or 4 people that officially and formally are entrusted to look after the codes are the only people that know the codes. Therefore, it behooves us all to think much more laterally and much more outside the box about nuclear safety. Our assumptions may not always hold. Then there is what I call the hubris factor, tinkering with the tail of the dragon. Hubris is excessive confidence. Protocols, procedures, regulations, physical infrastructure, these put together sometimes give us a false sense of confidence. We have a proliferation of small modular reactors. They're all over. And it's good for energy. But what are the assumptions behind those small modular reactors? An interesting one is war and conflict. Russia, Ukraine, and the nuclear reactors that are caught in between. All the safety programs did not take into consideration safety under conditions of war and conflict. These many smaller modular reactors put together, what is the impact? What is the impact of digitalization and AI? So we have this kind of arrogance, which I call certitude arrogance. The idea that we know as scientists, and we know what we know. And we're arrogant about that. We know what so many meters of concrete can do. We know how to locate the containment building. But what assumptions are informing those nuclear safety protocols? Under what circumstances do these assumptions hold true? 10, most importantly, malevolent geniuses hijack and deploy a nuclear submarine. Overconfidence sometimes manifests itself in the culture. The things that Robert spoke about, the people issues. Some of the major nuclear crises happened because people were overconfident and they took too many risks. Now, The last thing that I would say that they don't teach you is imagining the unimaginable. Fukushima design was a failure in imagination. Inspection regimes never imagine something that is in, they only imagine things that are inspectable, never things that are not inspectable. Now I'll give you an example. Some of the radionuclides require deep time thinking. Cesium-137 is a half-life of 30 years. Plutonium-239 is a half-life of 24,000 years. Iodine-129 has a half-life of 15.7 million years. 8 years from now will be in 2056. 24,000 years from now, I do not know what that year will be. Later on, 15.7 million years. But here is the issue. Let us assume that you are in charge of a nuclear safety program. How do you give instructions to people or to a species that shall exist 24,000 years from now? Instructions with regards to the plutonium-239 that is in your custody right now. Because 24,000 years from now, it will still be radioactive. And it might still be imposing serious harm or danger to them. But how do you communicate with such a people? A species that you do not even know. So nuclear safety requires us to imagine the unimaginable. How do you design a warning system to alert people? The systems that we have today, most of them, they are actually based on knowledge that was developed 70 years ago. Most of the reactors that we have now, many in Europe, get what was projected to be a 40-year lifespan. They've gone beyond their shelf life. What did they imagine 70 years ago about these reactors? And the challenges that we're facing with those reactors now is traceable to a failure of imagination 70 years back. Similarly, if we are not careful, our failure of imagination today is going to create a nuclear safety incident for a different generation altogether. And we might beat our chests and say, our programs were so intact, so solid that nobody got killed. Yet it is our programs that may kill hundreds of people 70 years from now. That's the challenge that we have with nuclear safety. So what is the missing link? The missing link is not the textbook. The missing link is not the knowledgeable professor. The missing link is not the knowledge. The missing link is the human being with the right moral compass. No university program is meeting those people. If you look at in the US, no university program is meeting people that would say, what happened at Navajo can be repeated elsewhere, but should not happen again. What then tends to happen is that the communities, the elite communities that shout the loudest, those are the communities that get attention. What is the missing link? The missing link is the ability to think broadly about nuclear safety. I said I would go back to the paradox. Now it is paradoxical that the people that do not have nuclear technology may believe that they are safe, yet they are the most vulnerable. I'll give you 3 examples. The first example I'll give you is Ghana. Kwame Nkrumah initiated the first nuclear program in Ghana in 1963. 1963. History will tell you that Nkrumah was...
Hello, Dr. Chingarandi.
Yeah.
Hello, Dr. Chingarandi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, I will plead with you to see if we can quickly wrap up on this for us. Our time is almost exhausted.
All right. So
respectfully, sir.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So one statement, and I'll be done. Back to the paradox. The paradox is that communities that think they do not have nuclear technology and are safe because of that are the most vulnerable. And it is important to always bear that in mind. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Chingarandi. I enjoyed your discussion, your slides, especially the one on monumental mistake in mathematics.